You're listening to Puma Podcast.
So it's pretty bad. It affects my health in the way that it's stressful. We're not physically there, so we're not cannot help. Like we're sending money, donating, but we were like just the other day, like should we go back to Ukraine and like continue? And there's pros and cons to that, right?
It's all but guaranteed that in February 2024, Ukraine will enter the third year of its war with Russia. As the embattled country struggles to rally support on the international stage, it's important to remember that the toll of Russia's invasion continues to grow. And some of those who are paying the price are living among us in the Philippines. In this episode, we revisit a conversation I had with a Ukrainian man who was forced by the war to move to Manila with his wife and their newborn child. The Filipino wife of a Ukrainian soldier also tells me how excruciating it is to be here while her husband fights on the front lines of the war.
My name is Anton Loboda. I'm from Kiev, Ukraine.
Anton's an MBA student at the Asian Institute of Management in Makati. His wife is a Filipino-American journalist who previously worked for NPR, a non-profit media outfit based in the US. They've been in Manila since January 2023. But when Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, Anton was
In my apartment in Kiev. Everybody knew the invasion was going to happen. I was doing, just a couple of days before that, a stand-up comedy in English, and like we were all joking about the invasion, the inevitability of invasion.
Anton's a big comedy fan and dabbles in stand-up as a hobby.
And the night before, I went to both an English-speaking club and a swimming pool. I get out of the swimming pool at 11, and then I took a cab to my friends who live very close to me, and he uncorked single malt scotch, and we were watching the addresses of the presidents of Ukraine and Russia. And then I believe I did hear the speech of like, we're gonna do this special military operation by Putin.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении
And
8
then I
лет
took a cab Uber
издевательствами,
back home, and the taxi driver was, like in Ukraine, they're really fun too. And he goes like, "So what's going on?" And I'm like, "Well, I think the latest invasion started." And he's like, "Well, like everybody who wanted to leave and thought like who's not stupid have left, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then we rode in silence back home. And I went to sleep because I did imbibe 100, 200 milliliters of scotch. And I was tired from the previous day of exercise, and it was a long, long, long day, right? So I came home at 3 or something.
Блять, звони маме, говори, что в метро шла.
I was woken up by the blast. It was pretty close. The jets, air jets, they are fighter jets, were flying nearby, and I just fell back to sleep. Then I woke up again by my friend from Austria, who said, "Anton, I think the invasion has started." And I it was like 4 hours of sleep by then. And then I'm like, wait, I need to like pack. And I already had like pre-packed stuff with like food supplies and water, but I wanted to fill out the bath tub with water just in case the water goes out and stuff.
Now, Anton isn't a soldier, but he grew up around them, so the scenes in Kiev last year were more familiar to him than most.
My dad is military, so my childhood was not the easiest one. For me, because it was already in the 8th year of war, and I actually went to the US in 2015 to volunteer as an interpreter with wounded people from Ukraine, soldiers with amputees for 1 year. I did provide the interpreting services for them. I had a medal from the Department of Defense of Ukraine, from Ministry of Defense in my name. So I was like, mentally prepared for that.
But the days following Russia's full-scale invasion took their toll on him all the same.
The first months of the war, I was actually riding an ambulance to like eastern Ukraine and Kiev, and where there was a talk, the Russian column of 80 kilometers just stopped next to Kiev. Like we were evacuating people and kids on life support, like the most people who like require the most help. So like that month did a number on my physical health where you would sleep on any conditions really, and it's super cold. It gets super and windy and cold. I was just like I became paralyzed. Like I was sitting down like when I met with my wife in a 5-star hotel. I already had the job with them.
Anton's wife was working for NPR at the time. She traveled to Ukraine to cover the invasion. Anton was her interpreter.
But like I was sitting down in this nice couch, and it's like this really expensive like 5-star hotel with like huge couches. I'm sitting down and I realized that I got paralyzed. Like I cannot move. So like for a week I had to have 3 shots in my ass a day of like pain meds and anti-inflammatory shit so I could even walk.
This was here or back in
There, and it happens again. So we were in Ukraine, traveling around Ukraine doing interviews like yourself.
They'd spend the rest of 2022 documenting the war. But in that time, Anton's wife got pregnant. They left Ukraine so that they could have the baby here in the Philippines.
The stress level was, I'm not gonna say insane because it's an American word, but like intense. So we left January 14 from Ukraine.
The trouble continued in Manila.
The baby that we got born here, who is a Filipino Ukrainian American baby, it was affecting the health of my wife. Very, very slightly premature baby, but like the due date was like 1 month earlier. So that was really, 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 really awful. And I came to a physical therapist here in the Philippines, and it's pretty badly organized. I just finished like 10 sessions for $60, so that's lots of money, where my muscles are spasmed. Because also like in Ukraine we don't use ACs, and here everything is AC, and my wife was pregnant, so she would like run AC on max, and it was just like plus stress, plus undersleeping because I'm talking to my European friends, Ukrainians and Americans, and the MBA, and our visas and the baby. Is just so much stress.
In addition to getting his master's degree, Anton is taking an online course at the Kiev Institute of Gestalt and Psychodrama. He wants to be a counselor for Ukrainians dealing with the psychological toll of the war.
My wife is a journalist, so we did establish the bureau in Kiev for NPR, and lots of her colleagues are there who are Americans or Ukrainian Americans, and some Europeans, and lots of my friends. Some of them dead, right, since the war, are still in touch, and the Facebook is like lots in war. So yeah, it's stressful.
I asked if they ever thought about going back to Ukraine.
I mean, I would love eventually to come back because the baby is also Ukrainian, at least to a certain degree, because she's American. By passport, she's a Filipino because of her mom, 100% Filipino, and she's Ukrainian because her dad is Ukrainian. So, yeah, of course I would love to show my baby Ukraine. The baby doesn't need to hear the sounds of the explosions unless, in my opinion, my philosophy, like unless you don't have the money, right? But we work hard, so we do.
We'll hear from the Filipino wife of a Ukrainian on the front lines of the war after a quick break.
My name is Natasha. I am based in the Philippines and I'm working full-time for a management consultant company here. I'm married to Yaroslav. He's Ukrainian and I met him in law school in London.
Sometime around 2014, both Natasha and Yaroslav left London.
So he had moved back to Ukraine because he is from Crimea, and around that time, Russia had annexed Crimea. So he had to sort some stuff out there, and then I had to deal with stuff at home in the Philippines. So we basically moved back to our own homes temporarily, and then I moved to Ukraine after we got married. Ukraine, I realized, wasn't for me at the time. So we had agreed to try establishing ourselves in the Philippines. So Yaroslav moved to the Philippines to be with me in 2020, just before the pandemic hit. It was here that I gave birth to our wonderful son, Sava, who's now 2 years old. When the pandemic hit, actually, we temporarily moved to my parents' farm in Nueva Ecija because we thought, the space and nature would be good for us. We were raising our then 1 year old, and I was working full time from home. He had an office nearby.
The conflict Russia started when it annexed Yaroslav's home, Crimea, in 2014, continued all throughout their relationship. And by 2022, most of the world was wary of an all-out war.
And then one day he said to me, if a war breaks out between Ukraine and Russia, I'm going home. And that upset me at the time, so I didn't speak much to him after that period. But, we woke up one day with the news that Russia had indeed already launched a full-scale invasion. And true to his words, he said to me, I'm going home and it has to be today. So I cried. I convinced him to stay for the sake of our son, but he was adamant. He's really Ukrainian in that sense. He's very nationalistic. So I went crying to my mom. She had advised me to let him go. And my best friend's mother, who I also consider my second mom, told me that, no one should ever stand in the way of someone's duty. So he left that evening.
Yaroslav's brother and mother were both in Ukraine when Russia attacked. His initial plan was to get them both out.
But I think that we both knew once he steps in, he's not going to be able to get out. But, he took that risk. He was ready to take that risk to keep his mom and his brother safe. So, yeah, that's what he did.
And prior to this, did he have any experience with the military?
He graduated from a military academy in Ukraine. Most men, are required to serve. So he did that in a military academy. He came out of that an officer, so we kind of both knew that he would get conscripted at some point after he arrived in Ukraine. He went home on the day of the invasion, so February 24th. He took a flight right away. He arrived in Poland because there were no direct flights to Kyiv, right? He spent some time there trying to figure out how to get into Kyiv. So within a few days, he managed to do that. And then it was a few months that he was there. And he was moving around because the Russians were close to Kyiv already. So they were moving around trying to get someplace safe. And then I think around the time that the Russians pulled back, they had moved back to their home. And then shortly after, he volunteered for the territorial defense. So a few months there. And then in September, he was conscripted already. And so the first few months, and not days and not weeks, but months, were especially hard for me. I spent a lot of time on the couch, eyes watering, glued to the news on every channel, TV, Twitter, Telegram, Instagram, what have you. So looking back, I feel that I had spent so much time on the news that I don't really remember doing much else. I must have, though, because I haven't been given notice from my job that I was slacking off. My son isn't showing signs of neglect, thank goodness. So I had likely done the work. I just really don't remember it. So imagine the trauma. Instead, what I remember is like the horrible scenes of the first 100 days or so of the war. I went into a kind of downward spiral. Every time I saw a dead man, I saw my husband's face. A dead child, I saw my sons. A dead woman, my mother-in-law's. So it was really hard. But thankfully, I had snapped out of it myself, and I really turned to my son for strength. And it may have been a bit unfair on him, I think, but I take comfort in the fact that, he didn't have to try so hard. He was one, and all I had to do was look at his face, and I knew I had to sort myself out.
I asked Natasha how often she gets to speak with her husband.
In the beginning, we would talk almost daily, but these days, it's not as often anymore. Either he doesn't have signal or is not allowed to have his phone on him. On my side, I sometimes miss his calls because he rings me up when I don't expect it. A couple of days go by when we can't talk to each other, and then all of a sudden there's a phone call. I sometimes miss it. But I can say at least once a week we are able to video call. He sends messages when he can, and that's reassuring to me because at least I know he's okay even if we're not allowed to speak. I send videos daily, videos of my son, so he sees that when he has the time, so he knows what's going on in my son's life.
And when you do talk, what does he tell you about how he's doing, what's happening, where he is?
He can't say, much about the situation there or where he is. He's not allowed to. But from what I can see, that when he calls, is that he's tired, he's stressed. Age has begun to show in his face, and he has lost so much weight. It breaks my heart. But recently he sent me a message, and I think it's safe to read it out to you. He said, "I'm okay. My friend died. We are stressed. Strikes every day. Sometimes 40 kilometers away. Sometimes 1 kilometer away." While it has been, and it is tough for him to be in the middle of the fighting, and away from his family and friends for so long, I know for a fact that he's determined to fight for Ukraine alongside his brothers in arms. And he was actually also given the opportunity to, move up and switch departments somewhere relatively safer. But he didn't even take a second to think. He just outright refused. He told me that he can't abandon his men.
On February 24, 2022, the world woke to news of Russian tanks rolling into Ukraine. Today, the war shows no sign of slowing, and the stories you heard are just two of the millions of lives that have been upended by Russia's unprovoked and ongoing attack. In 2023, Ukraine launched a counter-offensive but failed to retake much of its territory. With conflict raging in the Middle East, the country has struggled to rally badly needed financial and military support from the West. Here's Natasha about the impact of the war in Ukraine on her life.
My situation is just one of the many families affected by the conflict, and it can be hard to understand the realities of war, especially when you're thousands of miles away and you're not directly affected. But I encourage people to keep an open mind and heart towards those affected. But on the other hand, I've had the pleasure to speak with Filipinos who really understand what's going on, and it's reassuring to know that people care. Every act of kindness and support makes a difference, no matter how small it may seem. Not many people realize this, but Ukraine fights for all of us, I think, and I hope more of us support Ukraine. I continue to hope for the end to Russia's aggression and the return of peace to Ukraine and the rest of the world.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. This episode was edited by Pidoy Blanco. Our producer is Jill Caro, and our executive editor is Veronica Uy. Thanks for listening.